38, married and a mom of 2 boys, ages 8 and 10. My sister Fallon is 35, single, and lives just 10 minutes away. We grew up close, or at least close in the way sisters forced to share a bathroom and clothes are. She's always been the louder one, the bolder one, the one who takes jokes too far and then acts like everyone else is the problem. Fallon has what she calls an edgy sense of humor. She believes roasting people is a skill, something she's honed over the years, like a party trick. She thinks it makes her the fun aunt, the cool sister. The problem is she doesn't know when to stop or where the line is or that my kids aren't part of her stand-up routine. At first, I brushed it off. She called me Momzilla at a Sunday dinner once when I reminded my boys to use napkins. Then it became domestic goddess, helicopter queen, and once CEO of Gold Star Parenting. It was always followed by a smirk and a laugh. Everyone laughed. I forced myself to laugh too. But it didn't stop at our family table. She started doing it at my son's birthday parties, at school events, even at my youngest soccer games. One afternoon, in front of a cluster of other parents, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Hope your boys don't pick up your whining genes." She laughed. My son stared at the ground. The other parents looked uncomfortable. My husband pulled her aside that day, asked her to cool it. She brushed it off, told him to lighten up, that it wasn't that deep. The next week, my oldest asked me if Aunt Fallon didn't like me. I said she was just teasing. He looked confused. I tried addressing it gently. After a dinner with my in-laws where she mocked the way I speak to my kids in front of everyone, I asked her to stop making fun of me in front of them. She gave me a smirk and said I was being too sensitive, then told me not to make everything about myself. I brought it up to our parents. My dad gave a half-hearted shrug and said, "She's always been like this." My mom said, "That's just Fallon." Like it was a fixed part of her personality we all had to accept. So I started pulling back. I stopped inviting her over for casual dinners. I told her we were busy when she suggested brunch. But that didn't last. My parents started pressuring me to include her more. They said family was everything, that Fallon loved my kids, that she'd be hurt if I iced her out. So I gave in. We hosted a barbecue my husband grilled, my parents came. My kids were running around with water guns. Fallon showed up late with a bottle of wine and allowed entrance. It didn't take long. While I was helping my youngest with his plate, Fallon stood behind me and mimicked the exact way I talked to my boys. Gentle voice, encouraging tone, exaggerated head tilt. Then she added, "Careful, don't bruise their delicate genius brains." Log from a few relatives, some awkward smiles. My youngest dropped his plate and ran inside. Fallon didn't follow him. She didn't even ask if he was okay. She just rolled her eyes and said, "Oh, come on, it was a joke." I went inside, found my son in his room, lying on the bed, face down. I sat next to him. He didn't say anything. That night, after everyone left, I sat with my husband in the kitchen. We didn't need to talk about it. We both knew Fallon wasn't going to stop. Not because she couldn't, but because she didn't want to. The reactions, the attention, the spotlight, it fed something in her. Every time I laughed it off, she got bolder. Every time someone said, "That's just Fallon," she got a pass. I realized I had tried every route people usually suggest. I talked to her. I asked nicely. I set boundaries. I reduced contact. I brought in other family members. I even gave in for the sake of peace. Nothing worked. But I wasn't going to yell at her. I wasn't going to cause a scene or fight back in the same way she attacked. No, Fallon wanted drama. She wanted a reaction. I wasn't going to give her what she wanted. I was going to give her what she hated. And that would start the slowest, most infuriating revenge I could think of. One she wouldn't even be able to explain without sounding petty. Not anger, not insults, not silence. Something much worse for her. And I was ready. The week after the barbecue, Fallon texted me, asking if we were still on for our usual Sunday brunch. I told her we weren't doing anything that weekend. No explanation, just a clear no. That was the first time in years I had said no to her directly, without cushioning it. The next morning, she showed up at my door uninvited. My husband was in the backyard with the kids. I opened the door and told her we were having a quiet family day. She stood there like she didn't understand the words, then rolled her eyes and walked off without saying anything. I closed the door and didn't look back. I decided I wouldn't be reactive anymore. No more arguing, no more laughing along, no more. That's just Fallon. I became polite but cold when she made her usual jabs at a cousin's birthday party. This time about how I pack emergency snacks like a paranoid squirrel. I didn't laugh or even look at her. I just said, "Okay," and moved on. At our cousin's baby shower the following weekend, she made another dig. Something about how no one should take parenting advice from me unless they wanted to raise kids who correct your grammar mid-sentence. People chuckled. I didn't. I looked her straight in the face and said, "That's enough, Fallon." My voice was neutral, not sharp. The room went quiet. She blinked, then changed the subject. That was the first time she didn't push back. From that point on, I was intentional. If a family event was happening at our place, Fallon didn't get a personal invite. I sent one general message to the family group. She showed up anyway to a game night at our house, but looked irritated the whole time. When someone asked why she was quiet, she shrugged and said she was just tired. My mom pulled me aside at that game night. She asked if something was going on between me and Fallon. I told her I was creating space where I felt respected. She didn't respond, just blinked and walked off. The next big test came at my older son's school play. We had saved seats near the front. Fallon arrived late, made her way toward us, and tried to sit beside me. I stood up and told her there was an open seat farther down the row. She stared at me, then laughed and followed me anyway. As soon as she sat down, she raised her voice just enough to ask if we were in one of my weird moods. I didn't answer. I turned to my husband and asked if he remembered to bring the flowers for our son. Fallon sat there for a while, then got up and left halfway through the play. She didn't say goodbye. A week later, she texted me, saying I'd been stiff and boring lately. I didn't reply. That silence seemed to irritate her more than anything I could have said. At a casual lunch my aunt hosted, Fallon tried again. She joked about how I run my house like it's a military school with gluten-free rations. But I was holding my son's hand, helping him pick food. I didn't look at her. I just said okay and went back to what I was doing. After that lunch, Fallon lingered by her car in the driveway. I walked past her carrying leftovers. She asked if we were good. I smiled and said, "I'm always rooting for you, Fallon," and kept walking. That moment flipped something. I could tell she didn't know how to read it. From that point on, I noticed something strange. She stopped showing up early to things. She started arriving just on time or even late, which she never did before. At another birthday party, this time for our cousin's daughter, she made a comment about how some people overparent like it's an Olympic sport. I looked over and asked my aunt if she wanted help refilling the drinks. No reaction, no acknowledgement. She cornered me later and asked if I had a problem with her. I told her I didn't and that I was focusing on surrounding myself with positivity. That night, I sat with my husband and mapped out the next step. Fallon had made herself the star of every room by tearing others down so I'd give her a new role, one she couldn't tolerate. I wouldn't block her, avoid her, or argue with her. I'd just treat her like someone who needed a little extra care. Neon why? Like someone struggling? Like someone delicate. I knew Fallon. I knew that nothing got under her skin more than being seen as weak or pitied. If she wanted to throw digs, I'd respond with syrupy support, not fake smiles, not passive aggression, genuine, excessive public kindness, the kind that would make her feel exposed without a single word said against her. And I'd make sure everyone was watching when I did it. The kindness started small. At a family dinner 2 Fridays after the school play, Fallon showed up in her usual dramatic fashion, wearing heels too high for the driveway and holding a bottle of wine no one asked for. She made a jab about the Pinterest-level table setting as she sat down. I waited until everyone settled and leaned over with a smile. "Fallon, you must be so exhausted managing everything alone. You're doing great." Though she choked a little on her water and stared at me like I'd slapped her. No one laughed. My aunt glanced between us. Fallon didn't say anything for the rest of the me. The next weekend, our cousin threw an engagement party. Fallon arrived fashionably late, avoided eye contact, and hovered near the food table. I beat her to it, made her a plate, and walked it over before she could protest. "You've had a lot on your plate lately. Just wanted to make sure you got something to eat," I said in a warm, public voice. She stood frozen. A few people nearby turned to look. Then I turned to the group and added, "Honestly, it's amazing how Fallon keeps pushing through. She's always been strong, even when no one sees it." The expressions shifted. People started giving her the kind of looks reserved for someone going through a breakup or recovering from a personal crisis. She followed me into the hallway and asked if I was mocking her. I told her gently, "No. I just think it's admirable how you manage without needing validation." She left before the cake was cut. 2 days later, my mom called, asking if Fallon was okay. I told her I wasn't sure. Maybe work was getting stressful. Maybe she was overwhelmed and didn't know how to ask for help. That Saturday was my brother's birthday dinner. Fallon came. She looked tense before she even sat down. When she joked about my obsessive cleaning routines, I responded with, "It's okay, Fallon. I know sometimes lashing out helps people feel in control again." The silence at the table was immediate. My brother looked up from his plate. Fallon stared at me for a long second and then didn't speak again for the rest of the night. She didn't show up to the next 2 family events. The first was my dad's mini-retirement get-together. The second was a casual lunch for our cousin visiting from out of town. In both cases, she texted the group last minute with vague excuses. My mom told me Fallon wasn't feeling up to it. At my nephew's christening the following weekend, Fallon finally appeared. She walked in like she had something to prove. Full makeup, expensive coat, louder than necessary. She sat at the far end of the table and stayed quiet for most of the event. When she finally spoke, it was to make a sarcastic remark about how the perfect family always takes center stage. I turned to her and said, "You don't need to perform, Fallon. You're loved here, even if you're struggling." She went quiet. My aunt blinked. One cousin awkwardly shifted in her seat when I stood up to help with the cake. I walked behind Fallon and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Fallon didn't show up to the next few family gatherings, and no one said anything about it at first. Like it was just another scheduling conflict, a temporary absence, not a reaction to anything. But I knew. She wasn't used to silence, to being unacknowledged, to having her presence go uncelebrated. Fallon wasn't someone who existed in the background. She was loud on purpose, strategic about commanding space. But now, the space she once dominated was quiet without her, and for the first time, people noticed. My aunt commented that the last few dinners had felt lighter, and my cousin, the one who Fallon used to mock for her boho parenting style, confided in me that it had been weirdly nice not to have to brace every time someone spoke. I said nothing in return, just nodded, and went back to refilling my son's plate. About 2 weeks after the last event, Fallon showed up at my house unannounced. It was a Tuesday afternoon, raining lightly, and I was folding laundry in the living room when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find her standing there with a plastic container of lemon cake wrapped in foil. No umbrella, no smile, just Fallon in a sweatshirt I didn't recognize, hair damp and slightly frizzy from the rain. "Hey," she said flatly, holding out the container like a peace offering. "I made something, or tried to. Thought the boys might want some." I hesitated but stepped aside, letting her in. The boys were at a friend's house, and my husband was working late. It was just the two of us, and it felt suddenly, terrifyingly quiet. She sat on the edge of the couch while I stood by the laundry basket. After a moment, she said, "Are we seriously not going to talk about it?" I met her eyes and asked, "About what?" She rolled her eyes and leaned back. "You ignoring me. Everyone looking at me like I've kicked a puppy. Whatever you're doing, it's working." I didn't answer. I kept folding towels. She sighed loudly. "You're playing the victim, and somehow it's making me look like the villain, which is ironic because all I ever did was joke around. You used to be able to take it." I placed a towel down carefully and said, "Maybe I just got tired of pretending it was funny." Her mouth tightened. "So this is what it is now? You freeze me out and act all morally superior? You could have just told me to back off." I turned to face her, keeping my voice steady. "I did, several times, kindly, privately. You laughed, you told me I was too sensitive, so I stopped explaining myself." She looked genuinely confused for a moment, then offended. "This isn't you," she said, as if trying to summon the version of me she was comfortable mocking. "No," I replied. "This is me. You just never gave her room to exist." The silence stretched, long and uncomfortable. Then Fallon stood abruptly. "You know what? Whatever. Keep your martyr act. But don't pretend you're doing this out of some enlightened sense of peace. You're punishing me." I watched her walk to the door and open it. "I'm protecting my kids," I said simply. That stopped her for half a second. She turned halfway toward me, her expression unreadable, then stepped out into the rain without another word. I closed the door behind her, leaned against it, and exhaled slowly. It wasn't satisfying. It wasn't cathartic. It just was. That night, I didn't tell my husband she came by. I didn't need to. I went through our evening routine, dinner, baths, bedtime stories, like nothing had happened, but something had. The cake sat untouched on the counter until the next morning when I threw it out. I didn't explain to the boys why. A few days later, at a family dinner hosted by my cousin, Fallon didn't come again. This time, my mom asked if I had heard from her. I shrugged and said, "She dropped by earlier this week." That was it. No elaboration. I could tell my mom wanted to press, but something about my tone stopped her. The truth was, Fallon didn't know what to do without the spotlight, and I had taken it away in the most subtle way possible, not with anger or confrontation, but with refusal. Refusal to react, to participate in the endless loop of provocation and defense. She wasn't used to being invisible, and invisibility, I was learning, was the one thing she truly feared. 2 weeks passed without a word from Fallon, and for the first time in what felt like years, my house was quiet in a lasting way. Not just in volume, but in energy, in presence. My boys laughed more freely at the dinner table. My youngest started asking more questions again instead of looking around to see if someone would make fun of them, and I noticed that I had more patience, not because I changed, but because I wasn't bracing myself anymore. It's amazing how much of your bandwidth can be eaten up just by anticipating someone else's mood. My husband, never one to push me before I was ready, simply said one night after the kids were asleep, "Whatever you're doing, it's working." And I knew he didn't mean Fallon. He meant me. I was breathing differently. But of course, Fallon didn't stay gone. She resurfaced in the way she always did, loudly, dramatically, and without warning. My cousin, the one who always tries to play Switzerland, hosted a birthday brunch for her daughter, and Fallon showed up late, dressed like she was going to a rooftop bar, not a backyard party with plastic chairs and juice boxes. She walked in smiling like nothing had happened, air kissed a few people, and immediately launched into a loud story about a hilarious coworker who thought HR was actually helpful. I kept my back to her, helping my son choose between blueberry and strawberry yogurt, when I heard her say, "I hope the food's approved by the parenting police. Wouldn't want to get reported." A few people chuckled nervously. I didn't even turn around. I just said, clearly but calmly, "I'm glad you made it, Fallon. I know it must have been hard with everything you've been juggling." That sentence was perfectly weighted, just enough ambiguity to make people wonder what I meant. I could feel the attention shift like a tide. Fallon froze for a moment, then laughed too loudly, and said something about how she juggled fine, thank you. But I'd already moved on, asking my cousin if she needed help with the drinks. That afternoon, Fallon hovered at the edges of conversation. She wasn't herself, not really. She laughed at the wrong moments, interrupted people just slightly off rhythm. I realized then that Fallon didn't just perform to entertain others, she performed to anchor herself. Without the reactions she'd relied on, she seemed lost. Before leaving, she approached me in the driveway, arms folded, voice low. "What game are you playing?" I looked her in the eye and said, "I'm not playing, I'm choosing peace." She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. She didn't have a script for this version of me. I went back inside, and for the rest of that evening, I thought about how many years I'd wasted trying to explain, trying to translate my boundaries into a language Fallon would respect. But now I understood. She'd only ever respected power, and the absence of my attention was the most powerful thing I'd ever withheld. Days passed, then a week, then another. At the next family gathering, Fallon didn't say much. She sat beside our mother, picking at her food, answering questions with short replies. She didn't crack any jokes, she didn't tease anyone. When our mom asked if everything was okay, Fallon just smiled and said, "I'm fine, just tired." It sounded rehearsed. After dinner, she approached me by the sink while I was washing dishes. "You really think you're better than me now?" she asked. But it didn't come with fire. It came with something else, something like hurt. I rinsed a plate and said, "No, I just think I deserve better from you." She didn't reply. Just stood there for a long moment and then left without saying goodbye to anyone. That night I got a text from her. It just said, "I don't know who you are anymore." I stared at it for a while before replying, "Maybe you never did." I didn't get a response. Fallon didn't respond to my message, and I didn't follow up. For once I wasn't pulled into her orbit, and that silence felt like progress, an invisible milestone, like finally walking past a familiar cliff edge without looking down. A month passed. Family events came and went. She skipped 2 birthdays and 1 graduation dinner, each time texting vague excuses in the family group chat. Work stuff, headaches, traffic. And while everyone seemed to accept it at face value, I knew what it really meant. She couldn't tolerate the version of herself she became in my presence now. No spotlight, no stage, no script that worked. And I didn't miss her, not in the way I used to anyway. I missed the idea of a sister, someone I could call when I was unraveling at 3 a.m., or when my youngest had a fever, and I just needed another adult voice to tell me it was going to be okay. But Fallon had never really been that person. What I missed was the fantasy of her, the one I'd edited in my mind for years to justify keeping her around. In her absence, I found small things returning to me. My kids no longer braced themselves when I picked up my phone. My husband didn't ask, "Is she coming?" before every gathering. And I noticed the change in my posture, subtle but real, like my spine no longer had to curve around someone else's chaos. Then came the baby shower. My cousin Taylor, newly pregnant and overjoyed, asked if I'd help organize a small family shower at her place. Nothing big, just balloons, brunch, a few silly games. She hesitated before adding, "I know you and Fallon are in a weird place, but I invited her, just so you know." I smiled and said, "Thanks for telling me. It's fine." And I meant it. I was ready. I didn't need Fallon to stay away anymore. I just needed her not to own the room. The day of the shower, I arrived early to help set up, laid out pastel napkins, arranged little jars of lemon water, even tied ribbon around the handmade soap favors Taylor's mom had brought. It felt good to create something warm, thoughtful, light. Fallon arrived late, as expected. She wore a floor-length coat over what looked like a club outfit, black, tight, high heels inappropriate for the lawn. She brought a bottle of champagne, even though the event was dry. She made a scene of greeting people, calling attention to her nails, her lipstick, her latest unhinged co-worker drama. I stayed by the mimosa bar, orange juice only for the pregnant guests, helping Taylor's aunt with glasses. For almost an hour, Fallon ignored me completely. Then, during the gift opening, Taylor unwrapped a swaddle blanket I'd crocheted myself, months of effort in soft grays and blues. Everyone awed. Taylor hugged me and said, "This is beautiful." Fallon, without looking up from her phone, said just loud enough, "Wow, did Martha Stewart just possess you?" A few people chuckled, but the moment was already shrinking. I just smiled gently and said, I always admired how you never needed to make things to feel valued, Fallon. Not everyone can carry a room with their voice. She froze. That smile, the one she always used to cut the air, didn't quite come. She tried to laugh, but it caught. I turned back to Taylor and asked what else she still needed before guests started leaving. Later, while I was gathering used plates into the kitchen, Fallon followed me. She stood by the counter, arms crossed, and asked, "Are you trying to humiliate me?" I looked at her and said, softly but clearly, "No, I'm trying to honor myself." She scoffed, pushed off the counter, and left without saying goodbye to Taylor. The next morning, my mom called. "Fallon's upset," she started. I didn't sigh or defend myself. I just said, "I'm not going to apologize for protecting my peace." There was a long pause. Then she said, "I think she's struggling more than she lets on." I said, "She always has been." I wasn't cruel. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was just tired of making space for someone who burned everything she touched and called it warmth. A week later, I got a text from Fallon. "I don't know how to be around you anymore. It's like you're someone else." I stared at it for a while, then typed, "I'm not someone else. I just stopped shrinking." This time she replied instantly, "I liked you better before." And I wrote, "I didn't." She didn't answer after that. Another event came, my son's school recital. I didn't expect her to come, but she did. She arrived during the intermission, wearing jeans and a simple jacket, no wine, no entourage. She took a seat in the back, alone. I saw her from the stage when I went to congratulate my son. She didn't come over. She didn't crack a joke. She watched, quietly, like she was learning a new language. Afterward, as we were leaving, she approached slowly. My son looked up at her, uncertain. She crouched to his level, and instead of teasing, she just said, "You did really good today. I'm proud of you." He blinked and gave a small smile. Then she stood, looked at me and said, "I'm not sure I'll ever get it right with you." I paused, then said, "You don't have to get it right. You just have to stop making me feel wrong." She nodded. No smirk, no retort, just a nod. And then she left. I didn't know what it meant, if it was a turning point or just another pause before the cycle repeated. But for the first time, I didn't need to know. I had stopped waiting for her to change. I had changed the terms of engagement, and that was enough. Fallon didn't reach out again after the recital, not for weeks, not even when my mom had minor surgery and the whole family rallied around her. She sent a single text to the family group chat. Hope it all went okay, but didn't show up to the hospital, didn't call, didn't visit. My mom made excuses for her, as she always had, saying she was busy with work, that maybe hospitals made her anxious. But I didn't take it personally anymore. I had stopped looking at her absence as a wound. It was more like a draft from a window you finally sealed. Still there in memory, but no longer something you needed to brace against. What surprised me, though, was how much calmer everything else became. My kids started inviting friends over more, without checking first if Aunt Fallon would be there. My oldest asked if we could bake something together again, like we used to before all the weird stuff, he said. And we did. We baked banana bread, then cookies, and then a disastrous lemon tart that collapsed like a deflated basketball, and we laughed about it until we cried. There was space again. Not just in our schedule, but in our house, in our bodies, in the way we moved through our days. Then mid-October, I got a message from Fallon. No preamble, no emojis, just, "Do you have time to talk sometime this week?" It didn't sound like her. There was no edge to it, no flippancy, no guilt disguised as charm. I stared at the message for a long time, then wrote back, "Yes, Wednesday evening works." She didn't reply, but that Wednesday just after dinner, she showed up. No bottle of wine, no dramatic outfit, just Fallon, in sneakers and an old sweater I remembered from years ago. She didn't knock, just stood on the porch until I opened the door. My husband took the kids upstairs without a word. We sat in the kitchen. She didn't touch the tea I poured her. "I've been thinking a lot," she said. "Not about you exactly, about me." I didn't speak, just let the silence stretch so she couldn't fall back into her usual rhythm. "I realized something at the recital," she continued, staring at the mug. "I looked at you, and I didn't recognize you. Not in a bad way, just different. And I hated it. At first." Her voice cracked slightly. "I thought you were trying to erase me." I shook my head slowly. "I was trying to survive you." She flinched but didn't look away. "I know. I see that now. And the truth is, I don't know how to be close to people without turning everything into a joke. I don't know how to feel important unless someone else feels small." I stayed quiet. She went on. "I've spent so long being the loud one, the bold one, the one who doesn't care what people think. But I do care. and it's exhausting. I didn't know what I had expected from this conversation, but it wasn't this. A slow, unraveling honesty that made her smaller and more human than I'd ever seen. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," she added. "I don't even know if I'd forgive me. I just wanted to say it out loud for once." I nodded. "Thank you." We sat in silence for a few minutes. The kitchen hummed with the fridge and the faint sound of cartoons from upstairs. She looked around, then smiled faintly. "Your house feels different." "So does yours," I said. She laughed once, softly, like a sound she hadn't made in a long time. "I don't want to be that person anymore," she whispered. "I don't know how to not be her yet, but I'm trying." That was all I needed to hear. Not a promise, not an apology wrapped in sarcasm. Just the admission that something in her was shifting. That night, when she left, we didn't hug, but I walked her to the door and she turned and said, "Tell the boys I'm proud of them." I nodded. She walked away without looking back. And for the first time in years, I let her go without the familiar dread, without wondering when the next insult would come, without preparing myself to explain again and again why her behavior wasn't funny. I didn't need to guard myself anymore. I had done the work, I had enforced the boundary. And now, if Fallon wanted to be part of my life again, she'd have to meet me on level ground.